Here is what Israel committed to at Oslo. Israel agreed to recognize the PLO, who would no longer operate as a terror organization, but rather as a legal governing body, now to be named the PA, the Palestinian Authority. Israel agreed to transfer land over to PA control, the exact amount to be determined in a series of interim deals. Israel committed to educate its public towards peace and to prepare the Israeli population for the difficult compromises that would need to be made in order to allow for the establishment of a Palestinian entity right next door. Israel agreed to allow the creation of a PA police force of up to 10,000 members on the provision that there be no terrorists on staff. And finally, Israel agreed to supply the PA with arms and weapons in order to help them police their own people and destroy terror. And these were the Palestinian commitments at Oslo.
The Palestinians agreed to end all terrorist activities.
They agreed to recognize Israel's right to exist, which means they would have to amend the PLO National Charter, which calls for the destruction of all of Israel through violence. The PA committed to destroy all terror groups and confiscate illegal weapons. The Palestinians committed to preserve and protect all Jewish holy sites that fall under PA control in the transfers of land. The PA agreed that all future problems with Israel would be solved by negotiation only, and never again to revert to terror. And finally, the PA undertook to educate their people for peace. This included an end to public incitement towards violence and hatred. The world was so optimistic about Oslo that the leaders shared the Nobel Peace Prize in 1994.
I believe it is fitting that the prize has been awarded to Yasser Arafat.
Oslo was dubbed the Peace of the Brave. Both sides were taking major controversial steps. For the first time, the Palestinians were giving up their longtime dream of destroying all of Israel in favor of a two states for two peoples option. And Israel faced the risk of creating a terror state right in its backyard if the PA didn't live up to its commitment to end terror. By way of illustration, if the Palestinians controlled the entire West Bank region, Israel would be left with a thin waste of only 9 miles at its narrowest. This is what the United States Joint Chief of Staffs termed indefensible borders in a 1974 report. It's also important to consider the diminutive size of Israel in relation to its Arab neighbors, many of which have not accepted Israel's right to exist and are still officially in a state of war with her. Here, on a map of the Middle East, Israel is practically indistinguishable. And in relation to other regions, Israel is minute. Yet it was still willing to give up its land for peace. So, how did each side live up to its end of the land for peace agreement? In accordance with its commitment to transfer land, over the 5-year period, Israel relinquished to the PA 42% of the West Bank and over 90% of the Gaza Strip. This meant that 98% of the Palestinian population was no longer under Israeli control and were now subject to the jurisdiction of Yasser Arafat and the PA.
By the way, the only country in the world in modern history that was willing to give part of its ancestral homeland after it won all the battles and all the campaigns against an aggressor enemy, give back or give away part of its ancestral homeland in the hope that this will bring about peace. The only one.
And so, Israel complied with its agreement to transfer lands to the Palestinians, as well as to recognize the PA.
In accordance with its commitment to educate for peace, Israel embarked on a major campaign to win its population over to the ideals of Oslo.
There was a total change in Israeli policy. In fact, Israel suddenly began saying, we are for the PLO, that we want international recognition of the PLO, that we believe that if the PLO is strengthened, that this is going to bring us security. Terrorism against Israeli citizens is acceptable because the people who are being murdered by Palestinian terrorists are not victims of a terrorist war, but rather victims of peace. Most Israelis were willing to try it.
Peace was indoctrinated in all schools at all levels. A non-governmental organization, the Center for Monitoring the Impact of Peace, conducted a survey of 360 Israeli textbooks in order to determine how they related to peace and tolerance.
Israel made this commitment in Oslo to educate for peace. The truth is, Israeli school books, even before Oslo, were positive and were separating between the conflict and the Arabs themselves. Since Oslo, Israel has been very, very actively talking about Oslo, referring to Oslo, teaching about Oslo as opening a new dawn of peace.
Israel was so determined to educate for peace that severe steps were taken against those refusing to cooperate.
Being against Oslo, you were suddenly called anti-peace. If you were supportive of things that Oslo claimed to be against, like Jewish sovereignty over united Jerusalem, or continued expansion of Jewish towns and cities in Judea and Samaria and Gaza, then you were tantamount to a member of Hamas.
Despite the intense education campaign, not all Israelis were convinced. However, all Israelis were shocked when one of their own turned to terror. In 1995, a Jewish fundamentalist assassinated Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, claiming he was frustrated by the peace process, that the transfer of lands weren't bringing peace, only more dead Jews. However, the overall success of the Israeli education campaign is reflected in public opinion polls. Prior to Oslo, only 28% of Israelis supported the creation of a Palestinian state. Most were afraid of the security threat, whereas in the years following Oslo, the figures jumped to over 51%. And so Israel fulfilled its Oslo commitment to educate for peace. Israel also supplied the PA security forces with thousands of arms and munitions.
The new Palestinian security forces moved in to take the place of the Israelis, but the order didn't last long. As seemingly everyone with access to a weapon fired jubilant volleys into the air.
Israel was in compliance with its Oslo commitment to supply arms. Israel was not perfect in its adherence to the Oslo Accords. Critics state that even though Israel said it wanted peace, its actions belied that point. At the very time Israel signed the Accords, it was building and expanding Jewish settlements in the West Bank, on lands that were ostensibly to become a part of the new Palestinian homeland. Palestinians viewed this expansion as undermining the creation of a viable Palestinian state and was against the goodwill of the peace process. Israel countered by saying that the settlements were never a part of any peace agreement and therefore not a violation of the peace accords. Others criticize Israel because it delayed in its transfer of lands over to PA control.
Israel countered by saying that this was because of the rampant terror at the time. In other words, the lack of PA compliance. In the end, however, the public record testifies that all agreed land transfers did in fact take place, along with Israel's fulfillment of every other major Oslo commitment.